Kieran stepped off the shuttle and onto the barren surface of the alien world beneath his boots. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant hum of the engines powering down. His orders had been clear: avoid contact with Ilara at all costs. She was a weapon of unimaginable power. Her touch could kill, and no one had ever survived being close to her. The stories were endless of those who sought her out only to end up dead, withering away in an instant. But something about the way the reports described her had drawn Kieran in, a curiosity gnawing at him. The reports didn't just mention her power, they spoke of a sadness, a loneliness that echoed in every word. And Kieran knew there was more to this woman than the deadly myth that had been created around her. He wasn't a fool. He had been briefed thoroughly about her abilities and the risk involved, but he was different from the others. He had fought in wars, seen things that no man should witness, and he had learned to trust his instincts over the cold data that others relied on. The galaxy was full of monsters and threats, but sometimes the real danger wasn't what you could see or measure, it was what lay beneath the surface. And Kieran had learned long ago that even the deadliest forces could have another side waiting to be discovered. The ground was rocky and uneven as he moved cautiously across the terrain, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. As the minutes passed, he grew closer to the coordinates where Ilara had last been seen. A part of him wondered if this was some kind of test, a trap to lure him in and kill him, but that thought was pushed aside as he approached the ruins ahead. The ancient structure looked like it had once been a temple, a place of power long since abandoned and forgotten. Kieran's heart raced with anticipation, but he kept his focus. His hand instinctively moved to the sidearm strapped to his thigh, though he had no intention of using it unless necessary. He didn't know what he expected when he entered the temple, but it wasn't her. The figure standing alone in the center of the room was unlike anything Kieran had ever seen before. Her skin shimmered with a soft ethereal glow, and her eyes were the color of storm clouds swirling with emotion. Her presence filled the room like a storm just waiting to break, and as he stepped closer, he realized the power she radiated was palpable. It wasn't the threat he had been warned about, it was something else, something deeper. Ilara stood motionless as if she had been waiting for him, her eyes locked onto his, with an intensity that made Kieran feel like she was seeing straight through him. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the weight of the warning in his mind, but his curiosity pushed him forward. Her aura was suffocating, a strange mix of grace and danger that seemed to hang in the air. Her skin glowed with an otherworldly light that shifted and pulsed with each movement she made, as if she were not entirely of this world. Kieran took a step closer, unsure of what to expect, but unwilling to back away. She spoke without a sound. At first her lips barely moved, but her voice echoed in his mind, soft and melodic, yet tinged with sorrow. She welcomed him as though she had been expecting him all along, and the strange thing was that Kieran believed her power was undeniable. But it wasn't just her power that affected him, it was the depth of her loneliness, the aching sadness in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a weapon, she was a person trapped by the very thing that made her dangerous. Ilara's voice reverberated in his mind once again, and this time he could feel the weight of her words. She told him of her curse, how every touch she made could drain the life from another, and how her kind had been exiled because of it. The people of her world had feared her, feared what she could do, and in their fear they had cast her aside. They had abandoned her to wander alone in this forsaken place. As the last of her kind, she had learned to control her powers, but it had come at a terrible cost. She had been cut off from everyone else, never able to feel the warmth of another's touch or to share the simple joy of being close to another being. Kieran's heart ached for her. He had known loss and isolation in his own way, but nothing compared to what Ilara had endured. She had been turned into a monster in the eyes of her people, but here she was standing before him, human yet not human, caught in a tragedy of her own making. And yet he felt no fear, no dread, only a deep sense of empathy and understanding that made no sense to him, and yet felt as natural as breathing. He took a step closer, slowly reaching out his hand, as if to offer her a comfort she had long since given up on receiving. Kieran's hand hovered in the air between them for a moment, his heartbeat louder than ever before. He didn't know why he was doing this, why he was so drawn to her, why he felt like he couldn't walk away. But he couldn't help it the moment he stepped into the room with her. Something had shifted deep inside him, as if he had been waiting for this moment. His fingers trembled slightly as they reached out toward her, and he felt the electric tension in the air growing stronger with every inch closer. He got Ilara's eyes, widened just a fraction, her gaze flickering down to his hand before meeting his eyes once more. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of something there, an uncertainty, something Kieran couldn't place, but it only made him want to reach out more. He didn't ask her permission, he didn't need to, he knew what he felt. And somehow he knew she was waiting for him to make the move she couldn't. Kieran's fingers brushed against hers, and in that instant everything seemed to freeze. The world stopped spinning, the silence in the room became deafening, and then it hit him like a wave of raw energy. As his skin touched hers, he felt a pulse surge through his body, a wave of power that wasn't violent or chaotic. It was calm and steady, like the flow of a deep river. Her energy wrapped around him like a blanket, but it wasn't suffocating, it wasn't draining him, it was something else entirely, something that he couldn't explain in words. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, and Kieran saw her eyes widen with shock. Her hand twitched, as if she were unsure of what to do. Her power was supposed to be lethal, it was supposed to be instant, but nothing happened, nothing except the strange warmth that spread through his chest and down his arms, a tingling sensation that made him feel alive, more alive than he had in years. Kieran looked down at their joined hands, as if expecting something horrible to happen, expecting the pain and death he had been warned about, but there was only a calmness that settled in his mind. He felt no fear, no overwhelming rush of energy draining him. Instead, he felt a strange sense of peace, as though their touch had somehow balanced the storm inside of him. Ilara pulled her hand back, as if testing the boundaries of what had just happened. She stared at him in disbelief. Her voice was barely above a whisper when it broke through the stillness of the room. "How is this possible?" she asked, and Kieran knew she wasn't asking for an answer, she was asking herself. Kieran didn't know how to answer it. He didn't even fully understand what had just happened. How could he explain the sensation that had passed between them? How his body hadn't succumbed to the lethal force of her touch? How he had felt no pain, only warmth and calm? Ilara's confusion mirrored his own, and yet he could feel something else in the air, something fragile and delicate, like a bridge being built between them, something that neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. He looked at her, his mind racing for words, but all he could do was shake his head slowly. "There's no logical explanation for this," he said, "but I'm not going to run from it." He didn't know why he said those words. They weren't part of the plan, they weren't even rational, but as he spoke them he felt a surge of certainty rise up within him, a certainty that had nothing to do with the mission and everything to do with her. Ilara's expression softened, as if his words had reached something deep within her, something that had been buried for so long that she had almost forgotten it existed. Hope. She had long given up on hope, but something in him had awakened it even now, with all the danger surrounding them. There was something about Kieran's presence that felt like an anchor in the storm. Her gaze softened even further, but she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The silence between them was enough to convey everything that words couldn't express. The minutes ticked by as they stood there, her hand still hovering just inches from his, her power still crackling in the air between them. But now it was different. Now it wasn't a threat, it wasn't something to be feared, it was a connection, something Kieran could never have predicted, and yet it felt more real than anything else in his life. Everything he had known told him to keep his distance, to remain cold and professional, but this was different. This was a moment that demanded attention, a moment that couldn't be ignored. Ilara broke the silence, her voice quiet but steady. "You should be dead," she said, her eyes searching his face for any sign of weakness, any sign that he was lying or hiding something. But there was nothing there, nothing but the truth in his eyes, and for the first time since they had met, Kieran saw her hesitate. It was as if she couldn't quite believe that what was happening between them was real, and yet he felt the same doubt, he felt the same disbelief. But in that moment he also felt something more, something that told him they had to move forward together. Kieran looked into her eyes, and for a moment he could see the storm of emotions raging within her, the uncertainty, the fear, the yearning to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of her endless isolation. He could feel it too, the weight of what they were facing, the danger that still lurked on the horizon. But there was something else there too, a spark of hope that neither of them had expected. It was fragile and new, But it was there, and it tied them together more deeply than anything they could have predicted. Ilara pulled her hand away slowly as if testing the limits of this strange new bond. Between them her eyes dropped to the floor as though ashamed of what she had done, what she was capable of, yet Kieran could see the subtle shift in her demeanor, the hesitation in her movements. It was as if she was afraid to believe that this moment of connection could be real. But Kieran refused to let her retreat. He knew there was more to her than the deadly touch, the curse that had defined her for so long, and he was determined to show her that there was more to him than the soldier he had been trained to be. "We can figure this out together," he said, his voice steady though his heart raced. "There's got to be a way to stop this from being a curse to you, a way for you to have control over it, for you to live without fear. We don't have to be alone in this, not anymore." Ilara raised her eyes to his, her gaze intense, as though searching for the truth in his words. She had lived her entire existence as an outcast, cursed to hurt anyone she touched. No one had ever offered her hope like this. No one had ever promised to stand by her side without fear of what she could do. Her lips parted slightly as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. She didn't know how to trust this, how to believe that Kieran wasn't just another person who would eventually fear her like everyone else had. But he wasn't afraid, he wasn't running from her. He was offering something she had never known, the promise of understanding and partnership, and that terrified her more than anything else, because it meant that for the first time in her life, she could imagine a different future, one where she didn't have to hide away in the darkness. Before she could respond, the ground trembled beneath them, the distant sound of engines roaring to life echoing through the ruins. Kieran's gaze snapped toward the horizon. The warning systems had gone off earlier, but they hadn't expected them to arrive so soon. The Empire had found them. The ground shook with increasing intensity as the roar of engines grew louder and closer, the familiar hum of Imperial warships filling the air. Ilara's head snapped toward the sky, her eyes widening as she saw the dark shapes descending in the distance. Kieran's instincts kicked in immediately. His training took over as he turned to face her. The time for hesitation was over. They had no more time to figure out the details of their strange connection. The Empire was here, and they were coming for her. Kieran's mind raced as he quickly assessed their options. They couldn't run, they couldn't hide, not with the fleet already in orbit. The best chance they had was to fight back and make their stand now before they were overwhelmed. Ilara looked at him, then back toward the approaching ships, the fear in her eyes almost tangible. But something else flickered there too, something that hadn't been there before: determination, the same kind of resolve he had seen in the faces of soldiers before a final battle. "We need to move now," he said, and without waiting for her to respond, he grabbed her arm, gently pulling her toward the entrance of the temple. Ilara followed without a word as they hurried into the dark corridors of the ruins, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened, the connection between them, the warmth that had spread through her when he had touched her. But now there was no time for reflection, only action. Kieran led them through the ancient structure, moving with purpose toward a hidden chamber where they could access the underground transport network he had heard about in the mission intel. The sound of boots pounding against stone echoed behind them as the first wave of Imperial soldiers began to enter the ruins. Kieran's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse racing as he and Ilara reached the hidden access point. The control panel flickered in front of him, and he worked quickly, his fingers flying over the buttons as he input the security codes they had retrieved before landing. The countdown began as the doors to the underground passage slid open, and they stepped inside, the cool, dark air of the tunnel enveloping them like a blanket of protection. Just as the door began to close behind them, the first blast of energy fire echoed through the ruins, a loud explosion ringing through the chamber. Kieran looked at Ilara, her face pale, but her eyes sharp with focus. "We don't have much time," he said. "We need to get to the resistance before they're upon us." But Ilara stopped for a moment, looking back at the chaos unfolding above them. Something dark flashed across her face, a brief but intense flash of sorrow, before she steeled herself and nodded. They would fight together now, not just for survival, but for something more. They were no longer just running from her past, they were fighting for their future. The tunnel stretched out before them, dark and narrow. Kieran led the way, his every step echoing in the silence that surrounded them. Ilara was close behind, her presence a constant weight at his back As they moved deeper into the underground passage, the sounds of the battle above were muffled, but still present distant explosions, and the occasional whine of blaster fire, reminding them of the urgency. They had no time to waste. The longer they delayed, the harder it would be to reach the resistance before the Empire closed in on them. Kieran could feel Ilara's unease, her energy pulsing with the tension that gripped her. He knew she was thinking about what lay ahead, about the risks of using her powers against the Empire, even in defense of herself and him. But he also knew that she wasn't the same person who had been exiled all those years ago. She had changed in the moments they had shared together, and he could feel that change in the air between them. It was subtle but undeniable. She was beginning to trust herself again, to believe that she could control her own destiny and not be defined by the curse she carried. They moved in silence for what felt like hours, but Kieran knew they were running out of time. The underground tunnel eventually opened up into a vast network of passageways, the kind used by resistance cells to move unnoticed between their hidden bases. Kieran tapped a hidden control panel on the wall, and the door ahead slid open, revealing a small group of resistance fighters waiting for them. The leader, a tall alien with sharp eyes and a steely expression, stepped forward, his gaze locking with Kieran's for a moment before shifting to Ilara. His eyes softened for a split second before he nodded. "We have been expecting you." Ilara stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had never been part of something like this, never had anyone expect anything from her except death. But now there was a different kind of weight to their gazes. They weren't afraid of her. They weren't looking for a weapon. They were looking for an ally. Kieran placed a hand gently on her shoulder and whispered, "We'll get through this together. We're not alone anymore." The words seemed to settle her as the weight of their mission sank in. They were part of something bigger now, not just survivors or outcasts, but fighters for a future where she could finally be free of the fear that had bound her for so long. The resistance leader gave a quick signal, and the group moved into action. Preparations began immediately. Weapons were checked and plans laid out, but as Kieran and Ilara stood together among them, they both knew this wasn't just about defeating the Empire anymore. This was about rebuilding something that had been shattered, a chance for redemption for them, both a chance for Ilara to finally see that her touch could heal as much as it could kill.